All right, so we're back with my buddy Christian here at Sustany Capital, and we're going to be going over blockchain FAQ, right? This is like a beginner's guide for blockchain, basically, right?
Let's call it that.
Yeah. Okay. What? Who are the people that should be listening to this right now?
Well, I think anybody who wants to have a thoughtful discussion about the topic should be aware of the basic terminology. If you ever write a thesis paper, I think you'll probably remember that you have to first define a word in order to be able to use it in a sentence, because different words mean different things in different environments and subjects. And so in blockchain, this is sort of particularly important since a lot of the terminology is still being developed.
Yeah.
A lot of this is new, and not only to a lot of people that are just talking about it, but even to a lot of people that are already building applications. And so they might use a different word in a context that you're not aware of.
Yeah.
And if you start having discussions and use different words in different contexts, then you might not actually have a useful discussion with each other, but you talk without meaning, right? And that's what you see happening right now a lot, actually.
Yeah, I mean, even still, I mean, I've been in this a relatively really short time, and I hear words every day that I have really no idea what they mean.
Yeah, and even I go back on a daily basis and reread how things are being defined in this particular context, because even within this subject, and there's different people on a daily basis that redefine it, and sometimes it's more useful, sometimes it's less useful.
Yeah.
And yeah, pictures often say more than 1,000 words, right?
Yeah, and a lot of people who are like me, I'm visual, so
Right.
it's hard for me to read something and comprehend it. It's easier for somebody to tell me
Right.
and
Right, same here.
follow along with something.
Right.
So yeah, I get it. So there's a lot of people out there that they don't even know where to begin. They don't know where to ask. They don't know who to ask.
Right.
So it's great to have somebody like you that can come along and spend some of your time kind of educating the people and getting up to speed.
Yeah, bring some detail to it, some clarity, hopefully.
Very good. Okay, so we have this is something you guys created here in-house, right?
Yeah, we use it as guidelines for our personnel, as well as kind of remembering to myself, right? Or we use it when we go into different companies to introduce the topic.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so we're at blockchain FAQ, and I'll go ahead and just turn it over to you, just kind of let you run the show here.
Yeah, so the first question that is not even clear to a lot of people out there is like, what are the basics of blockchain technology, right? It started out with kind of in the cypherpunk area, and hence one of the key components is what's called key cryptography. It means basically encrypting the information that's being shared across a distributed network to record a ledger. So a ledger is an entry of transactions, just like your checkbook would be. The difference here is that it's duplicated across many different nodes. So a node will have every transaction that is being created on a particular blockchain from the beginning of time. And in order to for people to participate and have a reason to participate, the network typically will have a built-in incentive system. So in the example of Bitcoin, that would be the mining. So the mining is actually the recording of a new entry on that ledger, and for that particular work, the miners receive a reward. So that's the incentive. They get their own Bitcoin if and when they are responsible for the new entry in the ledger.
Okay, cool.
And go to the next.
All right.
So what is the ledger? So at the heart of a ledger, it's basically a database that is recording every transaction. So a transaction could be the exchange of a virtual asset. So a virtual asset oftentimes is a cryptocurrency, could also be something else. And there's no central authority that is doing that recording, but it's independent participants. So anybody in the world could set up the necessary infrastructure and participate in this network in order to record these transactions in these shared database environments. For this to be accurate, a distributed ledger has a consensus mechanism integrated. There's different forms of those. The most common one at the moment, the most used one, is what's called proof of work. It's basically the idea that everybody that is participating in creating transactions has to solve a cryptographic puzzle. So this requires a computer to run either CPU or another algorithm on their own hardware, so expend work, expend energy, and hence it's called proof of work. And there's other proof mechanisms like proof of stake, etc., that we won't go in here. But essentially it's in order to secure that the entries that are being made are accurate.
Very good. Okay.
So oftentimes what people are talking about right now is like, why not just use a database? And honestly, most applications are probably much easier and much faster to accomplish using a centralized database. The main difference between a database and a blockchain is that the blockchain has redundancy and security built in. Whereas a database is typically centralized. There's one central point of authority, i.e. Your bank will be a central point of authority that certifies to you that, hey, you have these funds in your account, and will also tell other people about it. Hey, this person has this number of funds in his account, and hence he can transact on whatever purchase. Whereas in the blockchain scenario, every single node will record the status of your particular account. So anybody in the world can see this particular address, can go to this address and see that this address holds XYZ Bitcoin, XYZ Ethereum, XYZ Litecoin, any other currency you might be interested in, verifying that this particular address holds this particular amount. So
okay, so I've heard people, like, whenever people want to sell Bitcoin, and somebody says, I need proof of funds or something like that. Is that kind of how they would do that, showing that they had that many Bitcoin in their wallet?
Not quite, because I can show you any address with any wallet, right? So that wouldn't necessarily tell you anything about me having access to that particular fund.
Oh.
So I would actually have to send it to you.
Wow. Okay.
In order to prove that. Right? Or I can move it for you to a different address and just show you, okay, now it's in this address and now it's in another one, which has been done to show that certain exchanges, or in the Mt. Gox case in the past, that this particular person still had authority over these funds. So he would just say, I'm moving 5,997 Bitcoins from this address to this address, and then it happens. So that was good enough as proof.
So that shows proof that they had control of those Bitcoins. Got it.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that would be one way.
Very good. Okay, got it.
So a question that we hear basically on a daily basis, so how will blockchain tech impact banking? And that's kind of the next step, and this is what's already happening, not so much in the United States, but in other nations. So the first one, and the most obvious one, is payments. So a blockchain almost as a side effect, although the original blockchain, so Bitcoin, was created with the specific intent of creating an electronic currency. But other blockchains might not necessarily have this particularly in mind, but most blockchains have a payment mechanism integrated.
What's built in?
Built in as a side effect, yeah.
Okay.
Have a currency on their blockchain that enables you to provide payments. And so the obvious one is that if I don't have to go to a fiat currency, so a nation-issued currency, that I'm independent from any banking system. No bank has authority over Bitcoin, over Litecoin, over Ethereum. I can send it to you peer-to-peer without having a bank in the middle without someone that's rent-seeking, someone that takes a transaction fee out of it.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's the very obvious one. And it's more important for third world nations than it is for people in the developed nations where currencies are pretty stable.
Yeah.
But if you are in a country where you have very high inflation, then you're most likely better off transferring whatever fiat currency you receive immediately into some form of digital currency, Bitcoin or something else, and then keep it there until and when you want to use it for a purchase, and either hopefully you can make the purchase directly in a digital currency and or you will go to another fiat currency, but then without being necessarily subject to that inflation risk.
Yeah.
Again, this is more important to other nations, Argentina, Chile, etc.
Okay.
The second most obvious use case is remittances. There's 150,000 Western Union facilities around the world, and to use those is exceedingly expensive. So the typical use case, if you're a foreign national living in the United States under whatever circumstances, and you want to send money home to wherever home is, somewhere in South Africa or even just in Mexico, then the only option you oftentimes have is go into a Western Union station, give them cash, pay them a fee, and be subject to whatever transfer rate they assess, which is a lot, most likely. And so with any blockchain technology and its digital currency, you can circumvent almost all of that. So you can send, there was a recent example of someone sending 99 million US dollars using, I want to say it was Litecoin.
Yeah.
And he paid a fee of less than $1 for doing so. So if you tried this with Western Union, I would venture to say it would be tens of thousands of dollars for doing that, and it would probably take 4 to 5 days.
Because they take a percentage of whatever you're sending.
Yeah, they take 1 to 3%, and then they also apply their own conversion rate to whatever other fiat currency.
Oh yeah, so that's right, conversion rate.
They're
always going to lose money both ways. Yeah,
and that's typically the largest fee that you will incur, because it's up to their discretion. There is no official necessarily conversion rates that they are bound to.
Yeah.
So then thirdly, there's a bunch of loan and credit applications underway where you can, for example, loan crypto and take out fiat currency. And those are already tied to a smart contract. As an example, it would be, let's say, I have 100 Bitcoins, and so I'm loaning fiat currency against that, and it's worth, let's say, $900,000 right now, and I loaned $500,000 against that. As soon as Bitcoin would fall, if it would fall to that particular threshold, this particular cryptocurrency would be liquidated, and the lender would get his money back immediately.
Yeah.
So that it's entirely riskless.
Wow.
Unlike any bank loan, obviously. And with any other collateral, you would have to go and seize the asset, i.e. seize the car, seize the house, or whatever other collateral was pledged. This would be instant or is instant. And there are several platforms for this already out there.
Amazing. Wow. Didn't know anything about that.
Yeah, and you will see more of those, and some of those will actually build in specific wallet applications by themselves, where you immediately have that line of credit, if you will.
Wow.
So if you hold $10,000 or the equivalent of that in virtual asset in your wallet, the wallet will provide you with that line of credit, because there's no risk to it. As soon as you enter that smart contract, there's no risk for the wallet provider, so they can get by with whatever percentage rates they want to charge for that credit, because there's literally no risk for them, no work for them. It's all done.
They're not running credit checks or anything like that.
They don't have to.
Yeah.
They don't have to.
That's great.
It's an immediate collateral, and yeah, it's all done by a smart contract. Then the most obvious one is simply settlement. Right now, that's kind of the next slide. This is what we have. So the legacy banking system is tied to the SWIFT system. And because of that, because it's the lowest common denominator that here determines the speed and the things that you can do on the network, it's oftentimes 3 to 5 days before you get the money for someone who gave you a check and vice versa. In the meantime, these funds are basically held as float by the institutions involved who work with that float. I believe it's on average 2% a year that banks make on this particular float.
Wow.
To where the money is no longer in your account, it's not in my account, you gave it to me, but it's stuck in the SWIFT system somewhere, so it has to show up someplace on someone's balance sheet, right?
Oh my God.
And that someone is any of those many institutions.
And they're making 2% on that.
And they're making 2% on average on that. So they're making a little more than inflation, but obviously it's not their inflation to begin with.
Yeah.
And so also what this means is that any of the systems that are tied to this, i.e. PayPal, and oftentimes PayPal is used as the example of fintech, but PayPal is just window dressing to the old SWIFT system. That means even if you're using PayPal, it doesn't mean that you have that money immediately, right? You see it immediately.
Oh, yeah.
The difference is you cannot make use of it immediately because you'll still have to use a bank account of sorts, so it will still take you 2, 3, 4, 5 days in order to actually have that money available.
Yeah, and something happened to me a while back, and this is just recent. I've been able to accept payment through PayPal, a couple of $1,000s here, $5,000 here, and just recently a company paid me $3,000. They held it for 30 days,
right? Because
they wanted to make sure that there wasn't going to be a refund. I'm like, you're making interest on my money because you're afraid that there's going to be a refund, but don't you have a policy in place already to protect them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you're also subject to whatever institution issued someone's credit card, for example, and he or she attached that particular credit card to that account.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the exploitation of, let's say, those loyalty systems, right? So a lot of times your credit card company will say, well, you get 1% cash back, or you get so many miles, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
This is actually obviously not given by the bank or the card issuer. It's coming out of the merchant's account.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
So all of those shenanigans won't be possible in a peer-to-peer transaction, which is what the blockchain enables.
That's great.
And it's always obvious who is paying what fee, if there's any fee. And typically it's built into the blockchain, the transaction fee, if there is any. And you also get the choice of setting that fee depending on the speed of transaction.
Really?
Yeah. So a lot of wallets will keep that opaque, but inherently you should be able to set the speed of that transaction. So if it doesn't matter to you if the transaction goes through within the next block, within the next 10 minutes, let's say, but you just want it within the day, you can just set it to the lowest transaction speed and you pay a lower transaction fee.
And that's called gas, right?
On Ethereum, it's called gas.
On Ethereum,
that's
okay. So there's other things on. Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's typically just referred to as transaction fee.
Okay, because I did see that whenever I was moving something out of MetaMask,
right,
and moving it to a trading platform, I had to set the amount of gas, and I had to go through a whole video on what is gas,
right?
Because I had no idea what gas was.
Yeah, and there's actually a website that. It's called the Ether gas station. We'll show you what the average transaction fee was because because it's all part of the same blockchain. It's also interdependent. Means if there's a lot of activity, gas prices go up.
Oh,
so if there just happens to be a very prominent ICO that was happening yesterday, average gas prices because of that at one point in time were 93 cents per transaction.
93 cents.
Yes, so they were really, really high. Whereas typically they are lower than a cent.
Wow.
So you want to be kind of aware of that. And typically,
because a lot of people don't know that. They just say they're going to pay whatever it says. They just pay it.
Yeah, and some of those quote unquote retail wallets of the more popular applications, they will keep that under wraps and won't give you the option to actually change it. They will just assess it and typically make fees on their fees.
Yeah.
So you kind of want to smarten up on that. Start with one of those retail wallets, i.e. Coinbase, but then move to something that's smarter and educate yourself.
Yeah, because you can't do anything on Coinbase. It charges you what it charges.
Yeah, exactly. There's no option to change it.
Yeah.
So what are the applications and use cases of blockchains? So as of late, our focus has been very much on digital identities. So what we mean by this is a lot of times if you need to transact something, it will still be necessary for you to attach some information about yourself to that particular interaction. Right? Oftentimes it's okay if I just give you a certain amount and you transfer something in return. But sometimes it's going to become necessary to attach an identity to it, i.e. if it's a deed to a house, if it's a title to a car, if it's something where I need to provide you information about myself in order for you to provide me with a specific service, even if it's just the address. You want to be able to transfer that information. And the crux about this is twofold. On one hand, there is almost 1 billion people in the world that don't have any official documents to prove their identity. Most of them are in sub-Saharan Africa, and United Nations has a mandate out to solve this particular problem within the next decade or by 2030. And so there's a lot of projects out there right now that are working towards that particular problem, because the obvious one being is that you don't want aid to be misused. You want to be identify who received aid, who received vaccination, who received voter registration cards, and so forth. And then on the other side, in the developed nations, we're at a point in time where basically every digital identity, so your identity, is available to every bad actor in the world, because all the social media companies and even the legacy companies such as credit reporting, etc., keep copies of all of your data, your social security number, first name, last name, and so forth. And over the past couple of years and decades, this information has been copied and stolen an almost unlimited number of times.
Wow.
To where some estimates show that every identity of every US person will be misused 10 times within the next 10 years.
Oh my God.
Because there's just so many copies out there.
Yeah.
And we all have heard about the latest scandals of social media companies just giving a tremendous amount of access to your personal data to an unlimited number of people out there. And once it's out there, because it's digital, it will never go away, and it can be copied in an unlimited amount of time. So that's why this is such an important topic, because with the emergence of virtual assets, you also need to make sure that you associate those virtual assets to the right identity and not to some bad actor who created a copy of your identity, so that no one can all of a sudden transfer the deed of your house, the title of your car, or whatever other proof mechanism there was to that new digital identity.
Yeah.
And so that's why this is going to be a very, very important problem to solve. I will pay a lot of attention to that, and obviously the blockchain is a very good tool for that, but what needs to happen first is that the existing databases need to be cleaned out of records that you have no control over, but that belong to you technically. The second and most obvious application is blockchains create what we call digital bearer instrument. Your bearer instrument from the past would be your banknote. So you give it to me, I have it, you don't have it anymore. There's no dispute over the ownership, because now I can walk away with it and you don't have it anymore. So blockchains inherently create these digital bearer instruments in the virtual world. So I can transfer a limited number of virtual coins to you or another virtual asset, and just by virtue of the blockchain recording this transaction, there's no dispute. I don't have it anymore. There's no copy, but you have it now.
Got it. Yeah.
Thirdly, and that came about with the introduction of Ethereum's new blockchain, is the idea of smart contracts. The smart contract, oftentimes what's invoked here is kind of the picture a vending machine. So a vending machine, you take your token, you throw it in there, you push a button, and you get your desired outcome, which could be a Coke or a bag of chips or whatever.
Yeah.
Smart contracts allow you to do the same thing with virtual assets. So you can code a smart contract saying, hey, if someone sends 10 Ether to this particular address, send him 100 of these other assets. And this is what's typically happening in an initial coin offering. So someone,
okay, I can visualize that.
yeah. So
good.
someone says, okay, we're issuing this new token. This new token is worth 1 Ether per one of our tokens. So if you send 1 Ether to this particular address, the smart contract will return one of our tokens back to you.
Amazing. Okay, cool.
And obviously you can envision an unlimited number of other functions where you just simply say, okay, this particular deed is worth $1 million, which translates to XYZ Bitcoin. So if you send this particular number of Bitcoins, then the deed will be transferred to you. And this will happen in the future for anything that you can digitalize.
Movies, music.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very cool.
So there won't be any discussion whether or not you have the rights to it. You just get the rights assigned by the virtue of assigning your own credits to that particular contract.
Very cool.
And it gets executed. So fourth would be the topic of tokenization. So there's a lot of assets out there that lend themselves to easy tokenization. So the most low-hanging fruit is anything that's already sort of a virtual asset but hasn't been coded appropriately. Any of your loyalty systems, your point systems, your frequent flyer systems. You can imagine those all being tokenized, meaning that they're all now part of a smart contract system, that they all now have a transfer rate to something else, that 1,000 frequent flyer miles for American Airlines might equal, let's say, 0.1 Ether, and 0.1 Ether might equal $70.
Yeah.
So that you have the option of taking it out. At the same time, there's a lot of developments underway where other real-world assets are being tokenized. So you can imagine that if you have a house that you want to tokenize and the house is worth $1 million, you can create 1 million tokens and say you can own a fraction of this house.
Wow.
And you buy 100 tokens, so you own that much of that particular asset.
Very cool. And this is probably going to be really big in real estate when people want to, a lot of people come in on a big commercial property.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of challenges still to be solved. There's a lot of legacy systems involved, so there's many steps in between. So the lower hanging fruits are anything that's already digitized at this particular point in time.
Yeah.
But as a matter of fact, anything that is a paper contract is probably already somewhere in a database, right? So if you think of deeds to houses and titles to cars, they are already in the database someplace. So this additional piece of paper doesn't provide all that much value or security. If anything, it adds a layer of unsecurity, right? So if you lose this particular piece of paper, you might have to go back to the DMV or whoever issued it in the first place. So this cannot happen if you tokenize it in the first place. And so there's a lot of efficiencies to be had in the future for doing this.
Very cool.
You hear sometimes people use the term private blockchain, and oftentimes that's also contested by people who will argue that a private blockchain is not really a blockchain. So blockchains can be put out by corporations. So there's no need for a blockchain necessarily to be open source and let everybody participate. So Ripple, for example, it's actually created by a consortium. So there's a couple of companies behind that that created this particular blockchain and issued tokens on top of that. And so it's a permissioned blockchain. They have the right and could take it away from you. They can stop any transaction happening on there.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because it's private, right? It's private, or you can also call it a permissioned blockchain. So it limits the parties who can transact on it, and it limits obviously who can write to it, which is typically just the nodes that are then again permissioned by the actual issuer of that blockchain.
Very good.
So I guess we're taking a step backwards. So will blockchain transform the internet? So first of all, it's important to understand the basic internet language. And a lot of times internet is used synonymous with World Wide Web, which is incorrect. So the World Wide Web is one application of the internet, and the more more used application of internet is email. And then secondarily, it would be voice over IP, which is what most of our communication is going over right now. Even if you use the cell phone, at one point in time, it's translated into data and transferred from there over the backhaul. It's not actually voice communication in the sense of there's a channel for it. It's actually packaged. So initially, when the internet was conceived, it just consisted of the Internet Protocol and TCP, or the Transmission Control Protocol. And then email was added to it as the Simple Mail Protocol, SMTP, and some security layers were introduced. What happened lately is that Bitcoin and other blockchains inherently added another security layer or another protocols that enabled other transactions, such as what we call money over IP, and what we'll see in the future more and more is assets over IP and identity over IP, to where something is inherently integrated in the protocol itself. So that means it's not an application that you need to build on top of it, but simply by using this particular protocol, you can identify who is the actually authorized person. So inherently what those protocols do is they create peer-to-peer transactions, to where application layers will almost always introduce a middleman. So we refer to this oftentimes as we're now building a new internet, and we call it the Internet of Value Exchange.
Okay.
So how will blockchain transform the internet? It most certainly will. Right now we have a very few number of companies providing access to the internet. We have almost fewer companies that kind of are in control of content distribution on the internet. So with the decentralization of the internet, we can introduce many, many more players into the ecosystem. So you can envision internet and World Wide Web access being controlled by everybody. There's already the beginnings of different application layers, to where you can download a browser and you're now part of a new node. You can now start distributing files and access to websites. So if you think back to Kazaa and other file sharing programs, it's the same principle. Those were more rudimentary in the sense of you had to actually look through a catalog and see what files are available and by how many nodes, etc. So this will be more opaque now that we have more bandwidth available at the individual nodes, because in the past that would have been not practicable if everybody having 56K modems or even faster access, but it would not have been very efficient. Now, where we have fiber in a lot of homes, this becomes feasible. To where anybody can serve internet pages. And so there's a number of different applications underway that will help with this particular distribution of internet. Something that should have happened probably a long time ago.
I mean, in streaming movies, I mean, you get the buffering, and then it just sits there and spins forever, and can't get it, or trying to download a file or upload a file.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, these are all the slides that I prepared so far. There will be more forthcoming.
Okay, so that's kind of like the beginnings of blockchain. Just kind of getting people introduced to what it is and how it can be used, and then letting people start using their imagination on where they can take it.
Yeah, exactly. And the best way to start is always just install your first wallet and buy your first fractional Bitcoin of sorts and see how you can use it. I mean, overall, at the moment, it's mostly used for speculation. There's very few applications that are relevant to the developed nations. Totally different story, obviously, if you are in a third world country, again, where you don't have an identity, but all of a sudden you have access to a digital wallet and you can transact with anybody in the world who also happens to have a digital wallet.
Yeah. Well, this is great. What can we do next with this? Is this something that we can do like a one-on-one on how to open your first wallet?
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea. It's like, which wallet to download first? What virtual assets to maybe look at? What virtual assets to maybe ignore at this point in time to basically understand where we are in this development. Oftentimes it's like we are in the early 90s in terms of comparison to the internet, to where things are still very slow and there's very few utilities to be had. But the sooner you get into this, the sooner you get an appreciation to what's possible and to how certain developments will affect your particular situation, your job, your city, etc.
Okay, great. Well, then let's do that. Let's plan on having a one-on-one with your first wallet.
Okay, let's do that.
We'll put together a presentation for that, and we'll have it here for everyone on the Crypto the Wonder Dog show, and in conjunction with Sustany.